I need you to stop whatever you are doing right now, because what I am about to tell you is something I have never said out loud to another living person. And the reason I have kept it locked inside me for 3 years is not because I thought no one would believe me. It is because I was afraid that saying it out loud would somehow remind whatever I saw that night that I am still here, still breathing, still sitting at this same dispatch console in Texas City, watching the same dark water through the same salt-crusted windows, waiting for it to come back. My name does not matter. What matters is that I am the guy on the other end of the radio at 3 in the morning, when your massive tanker needs to be moved through the Houston Ship Channel. And I am the one who sees everything that moves on this water, or at least I am supposed to see everything. The night I am going to tell you about, something moved out there that I could not explain, that my radar could not find, and that my supervisor, when I finally told him about it the next morning, looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not disbelief, not concern, recognition. He looked at me like a man who had been waiting for someone else to finally see what he had seen, and that look scared me more than any of the rest of it. Let me tell you about this job first, because if you have never worked harbor dispatch, you probably do not understand what it means to be responsible for vessels the size of apartment buildings moving through water in complete darkness. A petroleum tanker at full load can weigh over 100,000 metric tons. I want you to sit with that number for a moment. 100,000 metric tons of steel and oil moving through a channel that is sometimes barely wide enough to accommodate it. And the person coordinating that movement is me, sitting in a dispatch office that smells like old coffee and diesel fumes, working with radios and radar screens, and a set of protocols that were written by people who had apparently thought of everything. Except they had not thought of everything. I know that now. The Texas City Terminal is not a glamorous place at any hour, but at 3 in the morning, it achieves a particular kind of ugliness that I have never been able to adequately describe to people who have not seen it. The industrial lights along the dock create these orange pools of visibility that make the darkness between them feel even more absolute. The water in Galveston Bay at that hour is black and flat, and it reflects nothing. When I look out from my console toward the channel, I am looking at something that feels less like a body of water and more like an absence, a hole in the world where something used to be. The tankers that move through it at night are lit up like cities, these enormous floating structures covered in navigation lights and work lights, and watching them move through that black water has always given me the feeling of watching something that should not be able to exist somehow existing anyway. Like reality is bending just slightly to accommodate them. The rules of this job are not complicated, but they are absolute. You never authorize a movement without visual confirmation from the tugboat captain. You never clear a channel segment without running your radar sweep a minimum of 3 times. You never, and I want to be very clear about this, you never trust a report that comes in on any frequency other than the designated working channels. That last rule was explained to me on my very first night by a dispatcher named Gerald who had been doing this job for 22 years and who had the kind of eyes that people get when they have spent 2 decades staring at dark water. He told me that rule not like it was a procedural guideline, but like it was a matter of survival. He said, son, if you hear something on a channel that should be quiet, you write it down, you note the time, and then you pretend you never heard it. You do not respond. You do not investigate. You write it down and you move on. I asked him why, and he looked at me the same way my supervisor would look at me 3 years later, that look of recognition wrapped in something that was trying very hard to be casual. And he said, because some things on this water do not need to know that you can hear them. I did not understand what he meant at the time. I thought he was doing that thing that veterans of any job do to new people, building up the mythology of the workplace, making themselves seem like keepers of secret knowledge. I smiled and nodded, and I filed that rule away in the same mental drawer as all the other rules, which is to say I took it seriously as procedure without taking it seriously as warning. That was a mistake. For the first 2 years of working this shift, nothing happened that I could not explain. There were strange nights. There were nights when the fog came in off the bay so thick that radar was the only thing telling me the world still existed beyond the windows of my office. There were nights when the radio traffic got strange, when you would hear fragments of conversations that seemed to be coming from no vessel in the channel, voices talking about coordinates that did not correspond to anything on any chart I had ever seen. But I always told myself there was an explanation. Atmospheric bounce, which is a real phenomenon where radio signals skip off certain weather layers and travel hundreds of miles from their origin point. Equipment interference, the kinds of things that have rational explanations even when they feel wrong. The night it happened was in November, 3 years ago. I remember the date exactly because it was the night before my daughter's 7th birthday, and I had been on the phone with my wife earlier in the shift making arrangements for the party, so I was in a good mood, which is maybe why I let my guard down, or maybe it has nothing to do with guard, and I would have seen what I saw regardless of my emotional state. I do not know. What I know is that at 2:47 in the morning, I was tracking the movement of a petroleum tanker called the Pacific Meridian, an enormous vessel, nearly 300 meters long, carrying a full load of crude out of the Valero terminal, being assisted by 2 tugboats on its port quarter as it made the turn into the main channel. This is a routine movement. I had coordinated this exact type of movement hundreds of times. The tugboat captains were experienced. The conditions were good: low wind, calm water, clear visibility. Everything was normal. At 2:51, I ran my standard radar sweep, and everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. The Pacific Meridian showing clean on radar, both tugs in position, the channel ahead clear. I logged the sweep, noted the time, took a sip of coffee that had been cold for approximately 2 hours, and looked up at the water. There was a light out there that had not been there before, not a ship light, not the kind of light that navigation rules require vessels to display. This was something smaller, something lower to the water, and it was not moving in any way that suggested a vessel under any kind of power. It was just sitting there, about 400 meters off the starboard bow of the Pacific Meridian, in a section of the channel that my radar was telling me was absolutely empty. I looked at my radar screen. Nothing. I looked back at the water. The light was still there, a soft white glow, almost like a lantern sitting on the surface of the water or just above it, and as I watched it, it began to move. Not quickly, not erratically. It moved in a slow, deliberate arc, as if it was circling something, as if it was orbiting a fixed point that I could not see. I picked up the radio and called the captain of the lead tug. I asked him if he had visual on anything off his starboard side, anything low and unlit. There was a pause before he answered, a pause that was maybe 2 seconds long but felt much longer, and when he came back he said, "Negative, nothing out here." His voice was completely flat. I have been doing this job long enough to know the difference between a man who has looked and found nothing and a man who is choosing his words very carefully, and this sounded like the second one. I ran the radar sweep again. Nothing. The sweep showed empty water exactly where I was looking at a light that was most definitely there. I ran it a third time. Still nothing. I was starting to feel that particular combination of confusion and unease that your body produces when the information it is receiving does not match the information it expects. That low-level alarm that sounds in the back of your skull when something is wrong in a way you cannot yet define. I picked up the radio again to call the Pacific Meridian's bridge, and that is when I heard it. It came in on channel 16, which is the international distress channel, which is always supposed to be monitored but is not a working channel for routine traffic. What I heard was a voice, and I want to try to describe it accurately because I have spent 3 years trying to find the right words, and I am not sure I have found them yet. It was a male voice, or something that was producing sounds in the range of a male voice. It was speaking in what should have been English, but the rhythm of the words was wrong in a way that made them hard to parse, like someone who has learned English by reading it rather than hearing it and does not quite understand where the emphasis is supposed to fall. And what it was saying, repeated slowly, was a set of coordinates. The same coordinates, over and over in that wrong-rhythmed voice. And when I plotted those coordinates on my chart, my hands going through the mechanical motions while my brain was still trying to catch up with what I was hearing, the coordinates corresponded exactly to the location of the light I was watching move in slow circles on the water. I did not respond. I remembered Gerald's rule. I wrote down the coordinates and the time, and I sat there, and I watched that light, and I listened to that voice cycling through those coordinates like a broken record, and I thought about what Gerald had said. Some things on this water do not need to know that you can hear them. And I thought, whatever is out there is telling something where it is. Whatever is out there is broadcasting its location to something. And I very suddenly did not want to know what that something was or whether it was already on its way. The Pacific Meridian completed its transit without incident. The tugs released it into the main channel. It moved off into the night, its lights shrinking to nothing. The light on the water stopped circling. I watched it for maybe 5 minutes after the tanker had passed, and then it went out, just like someone had flipped a switch, and the water was dark and empty in the way that radar was telling me it should have been the whole time. The voice on channel 16 went quiet at the same moment the light went out. I sat there for a long time after that. I finished my shift. I drove home in the gray early morning, and I went to my daughter's birthday party, and I helped her blow out the candles on her cake, and I smiled in all the photographs. And the whole time I was thinking about that light and that voice and the expression on my supervisor's face the next morning when I told him what I had seen, that look of recognition. I finally asked him directly. I said, "You have seen it before, haven't you?" He did not answer for a moment. Then he said, "There are things that move through these waters that have been moving through them a lot longer than we have been watching. The rules exist because someone a long time ago figured out that the best way to deal with them is to let them do whatever they are doing and not let them know you can see them." I asked him what would happen if you did let them know. He picked up his coffee cup and looked out at the water, and he said, "Gerald is gone." And he walked away. Gerald had worked that dispatch console for 22 years. He retired officially. That is what the paperwork says. But I have called every number I had for him, and none of them work anymore. And the guys who knew him personally have gotten very uncomfortable the 1 or 2 times I have brought him up. And his name is no longer on the plaque in the break room that lists all the previous dispatchers going back to 1964. It was on that plaque when I started. I remember seeing it. Now there is a gap in the list between the name before his and the name after his. Just a gap, like he was never there. And I keep doing my job. I keep running my radar sweeps. I keep monitoring channel 16 with the volume turned down just low enough that if something starts broadcasting coordinates on it, I can tell myself I did not quite hear it clearly enough to make out the words. And I keep looking out at the water at 3 in the morning, and most nights it is just dark water. And on the nights when it is not, I write down what I see and I move on. Because some things on this water do not need to know that you can hear them, and I very much need them to keep not knowing. There is one more thing I have to tell you, and then I am done with this story because I need to get back to watching my screens. 2 months ago, I came in for my shift and found a piece of paper on my console. No one knew how it got there. The building is access controlled, cameras everywhere, and none of the cameras showed anyone entering or leaving after the previous dispatcher had gone home. The piece of paper had coordinates written on it in handwriting that looked like the kind of careful, practiced letters of someone who has learned to write by copying rather than by instinct. The coordinates were in the bay. I have not plotted them on a chart. I folded that piece of paper and I put it in my locker, and I have not looked at it since. Because I am afraid that if I plot those coordinates, I will find that they correspond to a location I know. And I am afraid of what that would mean. And I am even more afraid that someday the light I see out on the water will stop being out there and will be a lot closer than that. And the voice on channel 16 will stop giving coordinates and will start saying something that sounds a great deal like my name. Keep watching. You are going to want to hear the next one. Story number 2. If you are the kind of person who takes long drives alone at night, and you have ever looked into your rearview mirror on an empty highway and felt that cold, specific certainty that something in the darkness behind you is not as empty as it should be, then you already understand the particular flavor of fear that I am going to spend the next 50 minutes walking you through. But what happened to me was worse than a feeling. What happened to me had weight and sound and a face. And the reason I am sitting here right now telling you this story in a voice that is still not entirely steady is that I got away. And I am not entirely sure why I was allowed to. And that uncertainty has lived inside me every single night since. My name is not important. What is important is that I drive petroleum transport for a company servicing Port Canaveral. And on the morning of March 17th, 2 years ago, I was hauling 8,000 gallons of aviation fuel on a deserted stretch of Florida highway at 4 in the morning, and something used the darkness to find me. Let me tell you about this job because it matters to the story. Driving petroleum transport is not like other truck driving. The regulations are different because the stakes are different. You are not hauling furniture or food or auto parts. You are hauling something that can kill everything within a significant radius if it goes wrong. The training program spends an enormous amount of time making sure you understand exactly how wrong things can go, because they believe, and I came to believe along with them, that a driver who genuinely understands the danger is a safer driver than one who is merely following rules without understanding why the rules exist. I understood the danger. I had been doing this job for 4 years by the time it happened, and I took it seriously in the way that you can only take something seriously after it has become so familiar that it is also boring. Which is to say, I took it seriously in the automatic, almost unconscious way of someone who has internalized the rules so deeply that they no longer have to actively think about them. The rules of petroleum transport are numerous and specific, and mostly concern the vehicle and the cargo and the route. But there are informal rules, the rules that drivers teach each other in break rooms and at fuel stops, the rules that never appear in any official manual. And these are the rules that actually keep you safe. One of the informal rules, the one I heard on my very first week from a driver named Castellano who had been hauling petroleum since before I was born, was this: if you break down on a rural highway at night, you stay in the cab. You do not get out to inspect the vehicle. You do not get out to flag down help. You call dispatch. You turn on your hazard lights, and you stay in the cab until official help arrives. I asked Castellano why, expecting some answer about traffic safety or liability, and he looked at me with this expression that combined patience and something darker and said, because the things that stop to help you on a rural highway at 4 in the morning are not always trying to help you. I had internalized that rule the same way I had internalized all the others. Automatic, unconscious, which is the only reason I am here to tell you this. The route I was running that night was Port Canaveral to a private airfield about 90 miles north and west. Aviation fuel delivery, fully loaded, 8,000 gallons at my back. The kind of payload that makes your whole body aware of its weight and inertia every time you touch the brakes. The highway was completely empty. I want to convey to you what that emptiness was like, because it was not the comfortable emptiness of a familiar road. This particular stretch of highway cuts through a part of central Florida that has been described, generously, as rural, and that could more accurately be described as a place where things go to not be noticed. Flat land in every direction, stands of scrub pine and palmetto that crowd right up to the shoulder, no lights anywhere except the ones I was making with my headlights, no other vehicles, no buildings, no evidence at all that human civilization had ever thought to establish itself out here. Just me and the truck and the dark and 8,000 gallons of fuel that turned my entire rig into essentially the world's most dangerous object on this particular stretch of road. I was about 40 miles into the route when my left rear tire went. I felt it before I heard it, that sudden shimmy in the steering that tells you something has changed about the relationship between your vehicle and the road beneath it. And then the sound, a deep rolling flap, and the rear of the rig starting to pull. I managed it the way I had been trained, slow, controlled deceleration, keeping the wheel steady, bringing the rig safely onto the shoulder without any drama, without any jackknife, without anything catching fire. 4 years of training and muscle memory doing their job perfectly. I brought it to a safe stop and I sat there in the cab and I called dispatch and I reported my location and my situation. And I turned on my hazard lights and I prepared to wait. It was 4:17 in the morning. Dispatch told me the nearest service vehicle was approximately 90 minutes away. I settled in. I had water and the remains of a sandwich and a podcast on my phone, and the cab was warm, and I told myself 90 minutes was nothing. I had waited longer than 90 minutes for things far less comfortable. I had been waiting maybe 20 minutes when I saw the figure. It was standing at the edge of the headlight wash, right where the light faded out into the dark at the side of the road, in that space between the palmetto scrub and the shoulder. Just standing there, a person-shaped thing in what appeared to be dark clothing, just standing completely still at the edge of my visibility. And I am going to tell you honestly that my first reaction was not fear, but was instead that specific guilty concern you feel when you realize someone might be in trouble. Because someone standing alone on a rural highway at 4 in the morning, the rational assumption is that they are in distress. Their car has broken down further up the road, or they have gotten lost, or they are hurt. That is what your brain does with the information of a person standing alone in the dark. It generates an explanation that puts that person in the category of someone who needs help. I did not get out of the cab. I want to be very clear about that. I remembered Castellano's rule and I did not get out of the cab, but I did lower my window about 4 inches because I thought if this was a person in genuine distress, I could at least call out to them, find out if they needed me to radio for additional help. I lowered the window and I called out and I said, "Hey, you okay out there?" The figure did not move. It just stood there at the edge of the light and I could not make out any features because it was too far into the shadow, but I had the strong impression that it was facing me, looking at me, just standing and looking at me with whatever it had in the place where a face should be. I rolled the window back up. About 10 minutes passed. I was watching the mirrors. The figure had not moved. It was still at the edge of the light, still just standing there, and I was starting to feel that cold, spreading discomfort that you get when something that should be classifiable is resisting all your attempts to classify it. A person in distress moves. A person in distress calls out, asks for help, waves, does something to signal their situation. This thing was doing none of those things. It was just standing at the edge of my visibility and watching me, and the quality of the watching felt wrong in a way I could not have explained to anyone, but which my body was responding to with complete clarity, my hands starting to sweat on my knees, my breathing going shallow. And then it started moving toward the truck, not quickly. That is what I need you to understand. It did not rush. It did not run. It moved at a pace that seemed almost casual, almost like someone taking an evening stroll that's slow and deliberate, and that measured pace was somehow worse than anything fast and frantic would have been. Because the slowness said something. The slowness said, there is no reason to hurry. You are not going anywhere. I watched it come through the wash of my hazard lights. It was tall, or it seemed tall, though I was having trouble fixing its proportions in a way that made consistent sense, like my eyes kept sliding off the specifics every time I tried to resolve a detail. What I could see was that the way it moved was not quite right. The articulation was off. The joints seemed to flex in ways that did not correspond to how joints are supposed to flex. And its hands, when they came into the light, its hands were wrong. I am not going to describe them in detail because some things I have decided I am not going to make myself describe, and that is one of them. It came to a stop next to the driver's side door, right outside my window. I could not see its face from my angle, could only see its upper body from the chest down, those hands, that wrongly articulated frame, the dark clothing that on closer inspection did not look like clothing at all in a way that made me not want to examine it further. And then it knocked on my window 3 knocks, slow, even deliberate, the kind of knock that is not a request, the kind of knock that is a test, checking whether something is there, whether something will respond. I did not move. I did not breathe. I sat in the center of that cab like a man who has decided that if he does not exist loudly enough, the universe might forget he is there. I kept my hands flat on my knees and I looked straight ahead at the highway stretching out in front of me, and I thought very clearly and very calmly the single thought: do not open the window. After what felt like a very long time but was probably 40 seconds, I heard something else. A sound, low and continuous, coming from right outside the door. I am going to say it sounded like breathing, because breathing is the closest word I have for it. But it was not breathing in any rhythm or register that matches the kind of breathing that living things do. It was slower than breathing, and it had a wet quality to it, and it was being produced by something that was standing close enough to my window that I could feel, or imagined I could feel, a warmth emanating through the glass. The dispatch radio crackled. The overnight dispatcher's voice came through asking for a status update, and the sound of that voice, that completely normal human voice in the cab with me, caused whatever was outside my door to stop making its sound. I keyed the radio and said something, I do not even remember what, some words that were the right words for a status update, and when I finished speaking there was silence outside the door. After another minute I made myself look in the driver's side mirror. The highway behind me was empty. The edge of the Palmetto scrub was empty. There was nothing there. Whatever had been standing at my door was simply gone, and I could not tell you where it had gone because it was not moving away when I looked. It was just already not there, which is its own particular kind of horrifying. The service truck arrived 71 minutes later. The driver who came to change my tire was a guy in his 50s, small and efficient, the kind of man who has changed 1,000 tires and finds the whole enterprise deeply boring. He did not comment on anything unusual. He changed the tire and had me sign his clipboard and drove away. I sat in my cab for a few minutes before I started the engine again, and I noticed something that I had not noticed during the previous 90 minutes. My door was wet. The outside of the driver's side door, at about the height of where a face would be if a face had been pressed against the window. Not wet from rain because it had not rained. Wet in the rough shape of something that had been close to it for a while. Close enough to leave that kind of mark. I delivered the fuel. I came home. I sat in my car in my driveway in the growing morning light, and I had a conversation with myself about whether I was going to tell anyone what happened. And the version of me that wanted to tell someone lost that conversation to the version of me that knew exactly how it would sound. So I kept it to myself for 2 years, until right now. I still drive this route. I drive it multiple times a week. I have not seen it again. But there is a stretch of that highway, about 40 miles out from Port Canaveral, where my hands always tighten on the wheel a little, and I always check all my mirrors before I drive through it. And I always make sure my doors are locked and my windows are up before I reach it, because Castellano was right. The things that stop to help you on a rural highway at 4 in the morning are not always trying to help you. And the things that knock on your window are not knocking because they think you have something they want. They are knocking to find out if you are going to open the door. Stay with me. The last one is the one that I still cannot fully explain. Story number 3. There is a specific moment that happens somewhere around 3:15 in the morning on a mountain road when your headlights feel like the last 2 points of warmth and sanity. In a universe that has decided to express itself entirely in terms of darkness and shadow, and the shapes that live inside them. And if you have ever driven through a mountain pass in Northern California in the middle of the night alone, in a box truck with 42 feet of cargo behind you, and the nearest other human being so far away that their existence feels theoretical, then you know the moment I am talking about. Your mind starts doing things that minds are not supposed to do when they are responsible for keeping a vehicle on a road. It starts finding patterns in the randomness. It starts seeing things in the peripheral dark that your forward vision cannot verify or deny. It starts asking questions that do not have comfortable answers, like whether the tree line is really just trees, and whether the movement you keep catching in the corner of your eye is the wind, and whether the thing that has been appearing in your mirrors for the past 40 minutes and then disappearing when you look directly at it is a trick of the light or something else entirely. My name is Ryan. I have been doing overnight fleet deliveries for 3 years in California, and what I experienced on a specific stretch of highway through the Klamath Mountains on a Tuesday night in January is the reason I now drive with a specific set of protocols that I devised myself, after the official protocols failed to account for what I encountered. I am going to tell you about those protocols, and I am going to tell you why each one of them exists, which means I am going to tell you the whole story. And the whole story is going to take a while because the whole story has a lot of moving parts, and the worst of them did not show up until the end. The route I was running goes from a distribution hub in Redding up into the mountains through a series of switchbacks and grades and long straightaways that slice through national forest land before coming back down into a series of small communities, so isolated that they sometimes lose power for a week at a stretch in winter, and consider this a manageable inconvenience. These communities need supplies. My job is to bring them those supplies during the overnight hours when the roads are least congested, and the deliveries to small local stores can be completed before they open for business. It sounds straightforward when I describe it that way. It was straightforward for a long time. The job comes with a set of rules that are mostly about vehicle operation and delivery procedures. Where to park, how to secure the cargo, what documentation to carry, how to handle discrepancies in delivery manifests. Standard commercial trucking stuff. But there were also a set of what the company called mountain protocols, and these were different because these were not about the vehicle or the cargo. These were about behavior, about what you do and do not do on these specific roads at these specific hours. You do not stop the vehicle except at designated rest areas and delivery points. This rule sounds like it is about efficiency, but it is not only about efficiency. You do not pick up hitchhikers. Again, sounds like a liability thing, but the way the dispatch manager explained it to me went beyond liability. He said, this specific thing in this specific area at these specific hours is something that people have tried before, and it has never ended in a way that made the driver glad they did it. You do not leave the vehicle unattended at any delivery point for longer than is necessary to move the cargo from the truck to the designated drop location. You do not, and this one stopped me when I first heard it, you do not respond to sounds coming from inside the cargo area if you have not been notified of any special cargo requiring attention. I asked what kind of special cargo would require attention, and the dispatch manager said, there is no such thing as special cargo on this route, which meant the corollary was, there should never be any sounds coming from inside the cargo area, and if there are, the protocol is to not respond to them. For 2 years, I followed these rules and nothing happened that required them to be anything other than background context. The drives were long and dark, and sometimes beautiful in that severe way that mountain roads are beautiful at night. The trees enormous and the sky full of stars when the cloud cover broke. And the isolation was the kind that makes you think differently, more clearly, about things you are usually too busy to examine. I liked the job. I liked the solitude. I liked the specific silence that exists above a certain elevation at 3 in the morning. A silence so complete that it has texture to it, a kind of physical presence. And then one night in January, the texture of the silence changed. I was about 60 miles into the route, in the section I privately thought of as the deep part, the stretch where the mountains closed in on both sides and the road wound through old-growth trees so tall and so close to the road that driving through them felt like driving through a tunnel made of living things. It was cold, maybe 28 degrees outside, and there had been some light snow earlier in the evening that had dusted the road surface and the shoulders and the branches of the trees and made everything look like something from a photograph of a place that should not be driven through alone at night. The heater in the cab was running. My podcast was on. Everything was normal. I saw the first one at the side of the road, and for a moment, just a moment, I thought it was a person. It was a shape in the trees, roughly the height and proportion of a person, and it was moving in a way that was consistent with how a person moves when they are walking alongside a road. Parallel to the road, moving in the same direction I was moving, at a pace that was close enough to my speed that I was able to observe it for several seconds before the truck moved me past it. And during those several seconds, I was looking at it in the way you look at something when you are trying to resolve it from one category into another, trying to decide if it is what it looks like or something that merely resembles what it looks like. And the longer I looked at it, the more I was unable to resolve it into anything that made comfortable sense. It was not walking. It was moving through the trees alongside the road, but the movement was wrong, too smooth for the terrain, too fluid for what the underbrush should have required. And the proportions were not quite right in a way that I could not immediately specify, like a photograph of a person that has been very slightly stretched in one dimension. I told myself it was a deer. The proportions were wrong because it was a deer. I told myself that, and I believed it, and I kept driving. 7 miles later, I saw the second one. Same side of the road, same relationship to the road, moving parallel at a pace matched to my speed. But this one was closer to the tree line, closer to the road itself, and I could see it more clearly, which meant I could see that it was not a deer. It was not a deer in a way that my brain could no longer rationalize away, because whatever it was, it had a head that was shaped in a way that deer heads are not shaped. And its movement through the trees was not the movement of an animal that uses its body weight to navigate terrain, but something closer to the movement of something that does not quite have the same relationship to physical obstacles that material objects normally have. I turned up the volume on my podcast. I focused on the road ahead of me. I did not slow down. I very deliberately did not slow down. And then something knocked on the side of the cargo box from the inside. One knock. Slow. Deliberate. The same quality of knock as something testing rather than requesting. The same quality of knock, I thought, as you might produce if you wanted something on the other side of a barrier to know you were there without necessarily committing to revealing the full nature of your presence. The protocol. The dispatch manager's voice in my memory. You do not respond to sounds coming from inside the cargo area. I had loaded that truck myself at the distribution hub. I knew what was in there. Cases of canned goods, cleaning supplies, bottled water, commercial paper products. Nothing that could produce a knock. Nothing that could produce any sound at all unless the road vibration shifted something. And road vibration does not produce a single deliberate knock. Road vibration produces rolling, settling, the occasional thump when something falls. Not one knock placed exactly like the statement it was trying to be. I did not respond. I kept driving. I turned up the podcast louder. 2 minutes later, another knock. Then a pause. Then 3 more, evenly spaced. I thought about pulling over. I want to be honest about that. The part of my brain that was constructed to investigate anomalies, that part of me that has always wanted to understand things rather than leave them unexplained, that part was generating a very persuasive argument for pulling over and opening the cargo doors and looking inside. It was telling me that I was catastrophizing, that there was clearly a rational explanation, that something had probably shifted and was now moving in a way that was coincidentally rhythmic, that I would feel stupid when I opened the doors and found a case of canned goods that had come loose from its securing strap. That part of my brain was very reasonable and very logical and very, very wrong. I did not pull over. The knocking continued, irregularly, for the next 20 miles. Not constant. Not frantic. Intermittent, like something that was biding its time. Like something that was waiting to see whether its presence was going to provoke a response, and when the response did not come, it tried again, a little differently, as if experimenting with approaches. The spacing changed. The number of knocks changed. The rhythm changed. What did not change was the quality of intentionality in it. Whatever was producing that sound was producing it on purpose. And the purpose was communication, and the communication was, I am here, and I know that you know I am here, and the question is what you are going to do about it. I did not do anything about it, and here is where the story gets worse. About 30 miles from my first delivery point, I came around a curve and my headlights lit up something in the road ahead of me, and I was already braking before my conscious mind had processed what I was seeing. Because my body knew before my mind did that something was there, and the body's reaction to that is always faster than thought. What was in the road was a figure, standing in the center of my lane, facing me, not moving. I brought the truck to a stop about 40 feet from it. And I looked at it in my headlights for a long moment. And what I saw was something that was using the shape of a person the way a hand uses a glove. Something that fit inside the shape but filled it imperfectly. in ways that you noticed when you looked carefully, and that you could not stop noticing once you had started. The height was wrong. The angles were wrong. The darkness in the area of the face was the kind of darkness that is not just shadow, but is instead the absence of something that should be there. And behind me, from inside the cargo box, came a sound that was not knocking. It was something lower and more continuous, something that my nervous system processed as language even though my conscious mind could not identify any words, a kind of subsonic murmur that seemed to be going in the direction of whatever was standing in my headlights, like a signal, like an update, like the thing in my cargo box was telling the thing in the road. Yes, still here. I have been with it the whole way. I put the truck in reverse. I do not know if that was the right call. I do not know if revering, putting distance between me and the figure in the road, was what kept me safe, or if something else kept me safe, or if safety was never really on the table and I have just been lucky. I reversed until I could see a shoulder wide enough to turn around on, and I turned around, and I drove back the way I had come, and I called dispatch and told them I had experienced a mechanical issue and could not complete the route that night, which was a lie, but was a lie that got me off that mountain and back to the distribution hub where there were lights and other people. In the morning, I opened the cargo box with the hub supervisor present. The cargo was intact. Everything was where it was supposed to be. Nothing was out of place. No evidence of anything that should not have been there. No marks on the interior walls. Nothing on the floor, except the interior of the back wall of the cargo box, the wall at the very rear of the truck, the wall that a person standing inside the box and facing forward would have been looking at during the entire drive, had a smell. A specific smell that I am not going to describe because describing it would require me to compare it to things that I do not want to put in the same sentence as this story. The supervisor noticed it too. He said, "Huh," and then he did not say anything else about it. And when I raised it in my incident report, the section about the smell was redacted from the final version without explanation. I still run this route. Different night, same roads. I have added my own protocols to the official ones. I now carry a specific frequency of sound playing through a Bluetooth speaker in the cargo area for the duration of the route, because I read once, in a forum that I cannot find anymore, that certain frequencies discourage certain kinds of presence. Whether that works or whether it is superstition, I cannot prove either way. What I can tell you is that since I started doing it, the knocking has not come back. The things in the trees alongside the road are still there sometimes. I see them maybe 1 out of every 3 trips, but they keep their distance. And the road ahead of me in the straight part through the deepest stretch of the forest has always been empty since that night. No figures in the headlights. Nothing standing in the center of the lane, watching me come, waiting. I keep the music going in the cargo box. I keep my protocols. And every single night, when I hit that deep section of the road where the trees close in on both sides and the stars disappear, and there is nothing in the world except the small cone of light my headlights are making in the enormous dark, I grip the wheel, and I keep my eyes on the road ahead, and I do not look at the trees, and I do not think about what might be moving through them parallel to my path at 3 in the morning. I just drive, because that is the job, because the deliveries have to happen. Because somewhere on the other side of these mountains, in those small communities that the rest of the world mostly forgets about, people are going to wake up and need what I am carrying. And that need is real and human and warm, and it is enough to keep me moving forward through the dark. But if you ever find yourself driving a mountain road in Northern California after midnight alone, and you hear something knock from the inside of a space that should be empty, please, for everything you care about, do not stop the car. Do not open any doors. And do not, under any circumstances, Look directly at whatever is standing in your headlights. Just drive.